And now is the opportunity, ma'am, to enter a plea of either guilty or not guilty. How would you like to reflect your plea?
Your Honor, on behalf of Mrs. Daybell, she enters a not guilty plea to both charges and a request for a pretrial and a jury trial.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Today we're going to talk about the Lori Vallow case in a little bit more detail. We're going to talk about the finances, which I think aren't associated with the finances of the Watts case as much as they actually should be. I think the finances in the Watts case probably play more than a majority role in why the crime happened. And it actually looks like that's the case as well with Lori Vallow. It looks like the debt is a kind of a precursor to the death. And it goes back a long way. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So I think the critical point to emphasize here is that the life insurance policy that Joseph Ryan took out on himself with Lori as the beneficiary amounted to $350,000. Joseph Ryan died in a Phoenix area apartment in 2018, just 14 years after his marriage to Lori. We don't know what her financial situation was like then, but what we do know is at around about the time of her divorce from Joseph Ryan, which is I think her third husband, she had liabilities totaling $750,000, right? $723,000 in liabilities. Okay, and that was 15 years ago. So even if she got the money from the life insurance, it was only it was only half of her liabilities from 15 years earlier. So one does have to ask, what happened? Now you could say possibly she sold the house that they were living in. And I think the house was valued around about $700,000 as well. So if you compare the $723,000 that Lori was in debt in 2005 to the value of the house, which was $710,000 in La Ventana in Austin, you kind of get the idea that she'd sort of done her maths. You know, I can get so much debt, I just sell the house and then I'll be fine, kind of thing. In other words, you use your house as a kind of credit limit in a way. But of course it's under the assumption that you're not going to share the house with your husband. The other thing that's interesting is if you look at her earnings per month, she's earning $3,700 per month as a hairstylist, which is not a lot of money, and also getting $1,500 in child support from Joseph, and that totals $5,200. It looks like she was spending about $1,000 per month more than what she's earning, and that is how you get into a shitload of debt. The other aspect to bear in mind is that they still owed money on the home, and they were in credit card debt to the tune of $28,000. That's Lori, including loans and other bills. And then there was also $11,000 on Joseph's Bank of America Visa and $5,000 on a Target credit card. Laurie had also failed to pay bills to a number of medical practices in San Antonio, including the North Central Baptist Emergency Room and ER physicians. There was also back taxes from 2000, 2001 owed to the IRS. This is all fairly old information, but what it is pointing to is what I call systematic deception. And what I mean by that is, if you are struggling financially and you don't change your habits, you continue spending, you continue to accrue debt, then you kind of find a way to wriggle out of it. You find a way to postpone. You find a way to move around and to deceive to some extent. And something that I think is quite interesting is one way that you can kind of do this is you change names. And one way of changing names is, of course, marrying somebody else. But, even in the Watts case, you have people with different sounding names and different pronunciation. I'm not going to go into that here, but I've certainly experienced that in my life, where some people identify themselves on Facebook or wherever a certain way, and then they change how they're identified. And then you think, oh, well, it's because they're not married anymore or whatever, but it's not necessarily the reason why. Why this is important, and you might say, well, how relevant is this from 15 years ago to what is going on 15 years later? And I would argue it's extremely relevant because it sets a precedent. Now, there are people who say, I don't see why it was necessary for the Watts case to go to trial. What we're probably going to find out in this case is the true finances of Laurie Vallow. I'm talking about leading up to the disappearance of the children, right? You're going to find out the true income and expenses and the financial situation. And that is why I say debt is a precursor to death in this case. I also find it very interesting, this whole life insurance thing. It's life insurance that actually seems to lead to the death of a person, where you can turn straw, the human remains of what used to be a living person, into gold, and then you can walk away with pots of gold. You literally can turn a human being, liquidate them, and turn them into pots of gold, which you can walk away with. And Ernest Becker describes money as excrement, as something that is like death. It's almost like saved up death, money. And so when you throw death at death, in other words, you turn a dead person into money, you can throw that at debt, and so you transcend those circumstances. I'm just saying it's quite interesting, no matter how you interpret the symbology. So you see kind of a lot of deferred payments in a host of different areas. You also see the thing of being unable to keep a home, living beyond one's means. And, if they were living beyond their means then, what was happening 15 years later? And I would argue, without even seeing the balance sheet, that this actually got worse over time, that the living beyond their means was getting worse and worse. And it was going to lead to kind of an unsustainable thing. Now, the thing that I think is very interesting is you have the fairy tale cult and the whole thing of power, that we are God figures, we are divinely installed leaders that are going to take charge of this army of 140,000. You have that story on the one side, and on the other side you have cratering debt. And you might be thinking about the end of the world. You might be thinking Doomsday is coming, the signs of the times. You might also have this attitude to money, that money is of the devil, or money is just, it's not really a real thing. It's just a means to an end kind of thing. And so because you're expecting the world to end, you're not expecting to have to pay your debts, including crimes, including, when I talk about crimes, I'm talking about small little civil crimes like not paying a speeding fine and not paying for this and not paying for that, but also bigger crimes. If the world's going to end, if things are going to stop on earth, why do I need to be accountable or responsible for anything? And so you kind of have an analogy, a kind of a parallel between these huge craters of debt and this sort of idea of earthquakes and cities falling into the huge cracks caused by these earthquakes and all these end of the world things, volcanoes exploding, pandemics, locusts and whatnot. And in this sort of scenario of anticipated chaos, well, is it really going to matter if I buy this nice dress and not really pay for it? I mean, the whole world's going to hell. Why don't I just get my quick fix before that happens? But then it doesn't happen. Well, not to worry, I'll just take out another credit card, but then it doesn't happen, right? And so you need something to defer the anxiety and to defer the debt. You need some kind of belief or hope. Now, in money, how it works is you need to convince the bank that you are good for it or that you are going to do something. But there's also another way you can do it. You can bullshit yourself and say this or that or the next thing. I think the other thing that's really interesting is in the same way that Shanann Watts was, I've described her as a nurse. She wasn't even a nurse. She wasn't a qualified nurse. But I've kind of described that as kind of the only job that she seemed to have. You might argue and say, well, no, she actually had other jobs. She did this and that and the next thing. But I'm just trying to boil it down to one thing that you can identify. And so the thing is, she was kind of a person who'd worked in a sort of pediatric call center. She wasn't strictly speaking qualified as a certified nurse, but she sort of worked in that area. The point being, because she didn't have that kind of level of education, she wasn't going to earn a lot of money. And that then leads to her turning to Thrive to save her from financial destruction. And that actually leads to a financial destruction because it preys on desperate people. And also on greed. You don't need to work. You don't need to pay for this. You go on holidays for free. You get luxury cars for free. You get a nice big house for free. And don't worry, it's all because Thrive is such a wonderful company. It's got nothing to do with really your work ethic or your work effort. It's just this incredible company. You just put a patch on your arm and suddenly you're rich. And there's some people who fall for that. There are also people who fall for your regard. And, if you regard, you don't need to pay debts. You don't need to pay taxes. You're free from that. Your kingdom is not of the earth and not of money. It's something else. And so, in a weird way, you kind of have the same situation with Chad. I think Chad's finances may have been better, but for the vision they had for themselves, they were still going to need money. And when Charles Vallow didn't turn into gold, when I think $1 million, was it $1 million or was it more than that? When that didn't manifest as pots of gold, in other words, when his dead body didn't sort of almost, like in Star Trek, where it's sort of, you hear that sort of music and then suddenly you see something there. So when Charles's body sort of didn't materialize into shining pots of gold for Laurie, they kind of didn't they have to make another arrangement? That's the question. And suddenly you thought you were going to get $1 million, or you anticipated you were going to get $1 million, and that is what was said in the body cam footage, that she was feeling either duped or disappointed that she wasn't getting that insurance money. It was going to, I think, the grandparents, the adopted grandparents. And so then you have a situation where Tammy then dies, but there's a life insurance policy on her. And the question is, what is that money paying for right now? Well, isn't it paying for John Pryor, Chad's defense? And so where's the money coming from for Laurie's defense? Now the answer is either Laurie has a little bit of money or Chad has given her a little bit of money. But how much money is left in the pot? And what is going to happen when the pot starts emptying? So I can kind of hear what some of you are saying. A lot could have changed in 15 years. I disagree. I think a lot changed for the worse in 15 years. And one way to make that sort of extrapolate that is you look at the wedding ring that was valued in 2005 for $4,300, right? And the wedding ring Laurie bought for herself, putting it on Charles's credit card, right? Just billed to her fourth husband. That is the irony of ironies, that Laurie bought her own wedding ring, and Laurie kind of valued herself at $38 in terms of the value of the ring. So you could kind of argue that Laurie's value as a wife had depreciated from $4,300 to $38. And that's a factor of 113. So if you divide 38 into 4,300, it divides 113 times. So you can almost imagine it that Laurie's stature, certainly in financial terms, in terms of her own standing, has kind of depreciated by 113. That's quite a lot. Now you might say, well, she may not have cared about money at this point. She's thinking about the afterlife. Well, not based on what she was saying about the life insurance, not based on what is going on, not based on the expenses that were going on at the time, going on a honeymoon to Hawaii. And that's, I think, the other part that is easy to miss is when you are in serious debt. I think there's this tendency to pine for relief, to daydream about paradise and ways that you are somehow just relieved of the obligation that you face. You might feel that you're not going to pay it anyway, or that you how can I put it, that this burden is something you're going to try and you're not going to let it shackle you down. But the fact is that it does. When you don't have money, you struggle to live. You're restricted in your options. You can only eat certain kinds of foods. You can only you are forced to work a lot, kind of thing. And then there are tiny little reprieves where you might buy fast food, or you might buy this, or you might buy that. But the walls close in, if I can put it that way. And as they close in, you start daydreaming about, you see someone around you driving a luxury car. You see a beautiful house. And you have this feeling of, I want that. I wish I could just have that. Why can't I have that? And I was thinking today about delayed gratification. I was raised with the idea of you can't have what you want, you've got to wait. You can't, basically that whole psychology. And I think it was actually quite bad for me in a number of ways, because how the world works today is kind of just in time. And, certainly in the media, you need to be first. Things are done at breakneck speed today. It's all about not waiting. But I think the value of learning to wait, learning to go without, learning discipline in terms of, well, you can't have what you want right now. In terms of finances means, well, having what you want right now when you don't have the means to pay for it, well, that's the recipe for getting into debt. Waiting a little while so that you can earn in a certain way and save, means that you learn how to pace your spending to your income. And some people spend their entire lives not learning that lesson. And so if you are living a life where you suddenly find yourself in terrible debt that you can't get out of, it kind of makes perfect sense that you would start imagining fairy tales where, one fairy tale can be, if I just jump ship, if I just marry another person, then I can cut myself loose from all of this debt. That's how easy it can be to get out of all of these knots, kind of thing, right? And I think some people do that. It is a way that you can sidestep that kind of thing. And I think there is a relationship between Shanann Watts' debt and Thrive. Thrive is the belief system she invested into that was going to deliver her from the evil of debt. And with Laurie, it was Chad's belief system that was going to deliver her from her debt. And she was just going to sort of fly on a magic carpet to her happily ever after. And it's very tempting to believe that kind of thing when you are both desperate and, in a sense, greedy. And I mean greedy in the sense of, well, you want something that you haven't worked for. You want something that you don't have the ability to pay for. You don't have the resources. You want something and you want it now based on some kind of magic formula. The bottom line with this whole discussion about bankruptcy and debt and life insurance and all that kind of thing is, the bottom line is anxiety. You may not worry too much about Laurie Vallow's debt. You may not worry too much about Shanann Watts' debt. You may not worry too much about Scott Peterson's financial situation. But I can tell you all those people were very worried about theirs respectively, right? And I think it was Juan Martinez, the prosecutor in the Jodi Arias case. He said, in his experience, all crimes are committed either because of money or because of sex or because of both of them. And I think this is a case, the Laurie Vallow case, is a case where you see how they are interlinked, money and sex. But the point I want to emphasize here is how moneylessness played into the dynamics of, for example, the marriage between Laurie and Joseph. And so there's talk about Tylee being traumatized, that there was a highly dramatic and emotional custody suit, that there were threats from Alex to Joseph. And you kind of get the feeling that Laurie's kind of embattled in some way in terms of that marriage. And there's no money. And I don't think Laurie would have told Alex, guess what, I'm overspending, I'm in debt, I'm not listening to my husband, or whatever the case is. Who knows, maybe her husband was also overspending. But the point being, I'm pretty sure the story that Alex got was that it's all Joseph's fault and I need you to protect me. And then that is what he did. What I would really like to know is, what were Alex's financial arrangements? What was Alex's financial situation? What was his job? How did his finances evolve? How was he incentivized to be Laurie's protector, both in terms of Joseph and Charles? And so you have this, what they call highly dramatic and emotional custody suit in terms of Joseph regarding Tylee, but then you have the same thing repeating itself with Charles, where, didn't Charles come and visit his children and he ends up shot dead? And that's also highly dramatic and emotional. But was it about custody? Well, they had just gotten divorced. I want to finish up just by talking about the cause of death, or the official cause of death, for both Joseph Ryan and Alex Cox. So Joseph Ryan's official cause of death is a heart attack, or in other words, natural causes. And there's some disputing that by his sister, who says there are anomalies in the autopsy report in terms of his height and also his weight. So that is from Annie Cushing, Joseph Ryan's sister. Just a quick note about that. Annie was only notified about 5 weeks after her brother's death by, I'm not quite sure how she found out, but it took a week for his body to be found, I believe, and the question is, why didn't Laurie tell Annie about her brother's death? And she apparently said something about the world is a better place without Joseph in it. Now, that you've got to see that in context. There are allegations of sexual abuse in terms of Joseph and Colby, and they had a horrible divorce. But besides that, even Joseph's sister says that he was quite a hot-tempered guy. Joseph was quite a hot-tempered guy. But what I want to compare here is the manner of death. Sorry, the cause of death. I always get confused between the two. The cause of death in Joseph Ryan's death, so the heart attack and natural causes, and compare that to Alex Cox's death. Now, Alex Cox's death isn't a heart attack, but it's also natural causes, and it's also kind of similar. It's kind of, I'm not saying it's a heart attack, but it's sort of in that area of cardiovascular disease and hypertension, and it's a pulmonary. Anyway, the official cause of death is bilateral pulmonary thromboemboli with atherosclerotic and hypertensive cardiovascular disease. I don't know if you need to be a rocket scientist just to boil it down to cardiovascular disease in Alex Cox's case, and that's a general term for conditions affecting the heart or the blood vessels. So there's an aspect which sounds like it's lung collapse, but it's also due to, I think, heart failure. So you kind of have what appears to be the same thing in both cases. Someone apparently dying of natural causes, and there being what appears to be heart failure in both cases. Now, a doctor might disagree. A doctor might say, no, in Joseph Ryan's case, it definitely is a heart attack. In Alex Cox's case, it's something else. So for my money, I would say it kind of makes a lot more sense to me, not only why these people believe what they believe, but also how that happened. In other words, why do you need something to believe in? Well, when your world is going to shit, when you are in a situation of urgency and desperation and anxiety, and you then convert that anxiety into something that's like a sideshow to something else, but you're in control of it. In other words, the whole Doomsday thing puts the debt into a kind of a weird perspective, and then you elevate it into the status quo of the Doomsday thing as God figures. Well, now doesn't your debt feel a lot more manageable and a lot less important? And ironically, I think you have the same thing happening with Shanann Watts, where she also has this huge debt bubble, but it sort of fades into insignificance beside the Thrive cult and drinking the Thrive Kool-Aid every day, where you feel nice about your world. Money doesn't really matter. Money is just this little means to an end, and you can easily sort of almost like ski your way over fields of coins and money to luxury living on the sort of coattails of Thrive. you can sort of snap your fingers and you can have whatever you want, and all the hardship and difficulties behind you, just by signing yourself over to this easy, lazy, nice life. Okay, so we half an hour in. I'm not going to take it further than that. Bear in mind, I'm doing a live Q&A on Sunday at 1400 Eastern Standard Time. This will be, I will obviously give preference to Patreons, questions from patrons on Patreon. And although I think most of the questions are going to be about the Watts case, you guys are really free to ask questions about any case you'd like to ask about, but kind of within reason. You know, there's certain cases that I'm less familiar with. There are a lot of new cases happening all the time. There are cases I'm very familiar with, like John Benet Ramsey, the McCann case, and so on. But obviously, I'm not going to be answering questions about cases that I haven't researched. So, but anyway, the floor or the lectern is open for those who want to ask questions. Just in terms of other news, today is a very hot day here. It was 28 degrees Celsius today, so the hottest day since winter has started fizzling away. 28 is 82 degrees Fahrenheit. It's quite interesting that the numbers are swapped around to get to the right figure, but it has been a really nice warm day. I actually took Timmy to get, I actually didn't take him myself. I gave him to a friend's wife who was also taking their schnauzer, and he went to a boutique for a shave. I'm actually feeling a little bit sorry for him because he doesn't look at all like he did look. It was a bit of an aggressive shave. I think he may even have gotten slightly hurt just from him being shaved very close to his whole body, and I think in future I'm going to do it myself. But he certainly looks totally different. I really didn't know he had such long legs. But I will maybe put a picture of him on Instagram, and you can guys can kind of have a look at Timmy really looking like a schnauzer, but also not looking like himself. I think one thing that made the trip less traumatic was that he was in the company of another schnauzer the whole time, a schnauzer that he sort of knows. But I still sort of feel a little bit sorry for him. I think it was a bit of a baptism of fire being sheared like that. So wherever you are in the world, I hope you're managing, and I'll see you guys next time.